What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Another week, another great week of college football. A lot to get into today. I think the first 2 weeks of the season here on these Sunday shows, I've had 8 topics. We've got 12 today. A lot to get to in today's show. Please be sure to like the video. That really helps out the growth of this channel. Also, subscribe so you don't miss any of the upcoming content. One more thing, too. I'm going to have timestamps in the description below. So if you want to flip from topic to topic, be sure to check the description. I believe YouTube creates those chapters as well. So, I'm sure y'all know what I'm talking about on the video. You can just click in between topics. Quick recap from my betting weekend. 4-4. It's just been really mediocre out of the gates. I mean, I think we're down about, a little bit over 2 units now through 3 weeks. Is it worst case scenario? No. But is not bad the expectation? No. I mean, 4-4 week. I mean, we lost 2 of our best bets yesterday. Penn State, Auburn under. That one hurt. And then Michigan State was just the total wrong side. We're going to get into most of these games throughout the episode, but just for the ones that we're not going to get into, I mean, North Carolina State was a good best bet winner. Probably should have won that game by 20 plus. The only other really comment that I'm not going to get to throughout the show, I mean, Virginia. It was a half unit play, so I'm not going to bang my head against the wall. This changed the day. I laid 8 with Virginia yesterday against Old Dominion. I mean, they ended up winning by 2, I believe, but they turned the ball over twice in the red zone. They missed a kick in the red zone. I mean, those are the types of things that just can't happen. It's just you can't really handicap that. The opportunities were there, and they just totally pissed down their legs. So that was a little disappointing. 4-4 is not the end of the world, but like I said, not the end of the world is not really what we're going for. So new week in week 4, and we'll look to break out in a pretty big way. Like I said, we've got a loaded show for today. So I'll go ahead and get into it. We'll start with what we saw. This is not necessarily in, I try to make these takeaways in priority order. I mean, we're not going to talk about, Appalachian State's Hail Mary right off the top. We'll get to that at the end. So I do try to make this by priority. I do want to start in Lincoln, Nebraska, though. I mean, what we saw yesterday was just a total drubbing. Nebraska actually came out pretty hot, and I was expecting that to be a competitive game because we typically see when, coaches are fired, those teams step up in that first week of the interim coach and then tend to kind of fade off as the season goes. We saw Nebraska come out hot, just kind of like they've come out hot offensively, really in all 4. I mean, I guess North Dakota, they didn't play well offensively early, but they came out hot against Northwestern, and they had a good first drive offensively yesterday. That's about the only good thing that you can take away because their defense is terrible. And I played the under in that game. It ended up coming through because Oklahoma, thankfully, started to slow things down in the fourth quarter. But Nebraska had a top 15 defense in the country last year. And, that's why they played so many close games. Remember, they held Ohio State to 26. They held Oklahoma last year to 23 in Norman. They didn't lose so much defensively to where you'd expect this big drop-off, but it's been a big drop-off. Give credit to Oklahoma. If you're an Oklahoma fan, you should feel good about your team. I think your front 7 defensively looked really good. But the bigger takeaway by far is, just how far things have fallen for Nebraska. And, I feel like we've talked about this a lot. So Nebraska now has 3 losses. They lost to Northwestern, obviously, to start the year in Dublin. What has Northwestern done since that? I mean, they lost to Duke at home last week, and they lost to Southern Illinois at home yesterday. So the fact that Northwestern was able to move the ball up and down the field on you throughout that second half in Dublin and beat you is a pretty bad indication about your defense. Georgia Southern, who put 45 on you in Lincoln last week, they come back yesterday, and they lose by 14 at UAB, score only 21 points. So if you're an Oklahoma fan, I think there is reason for optimism offensively. I didn't think Dylan Gabriel necessarily played great. He played certainly good enough for them to win that game. I mean, he wasn't exactly consistent in the intermediate to deep passing game. But they ran the ball well. And the reality of it is Nebraska is so poor defensively that if they just showed up, they probably would have put up 49 like they did. I just said this. I mean, I think their front 7 defensively totally overwhelmed Casey Thompson. I mean, Thompson got sacked 4 times. Nebraska wasn't really able to get a real run game going, and especially as that game got out of hand, it wouldn't have made sense for them to run the ball anyway. But I think Oklahoma can take good things away about their front 7, but I don't necessarily think that if history proves itself with Northwestern and Georgia Southern, I don't think beating Nebraska is necessarily a great indicator of where this team is at. They play Kansas State next week. And full disclosure, I expect Oklahoma to lose 3 conference games. I played them under the 9.5 wins. I wouldn't say I feel great about that bet right now because I did think this would be a much tougher test preseason. But I mean, I believe there's a ton of parity in the Big 12, and I think that gap is closed between Oklahoma and the rest of that conference. That's just my opinion. I mean, I think Texas and Oklahoma are pretty even. I think Oklahoma State and Oklahoma are pretty even. And teams like TCU and Texas Tech and Kansas is 3-0. I mean, there's just a lot of parity in this conference. So my bigger takeaway from this game is how far things have fallen for Nebraska. I was thinking about this during the game. This was just their 4th game of the season. They played 1 conference game. I mean, if you're in that locker room, what are you playing for at this point? The season is over. Your coach got fired. You cannot stop anybody. You can't stop Georgia Southern. You can't stop Northwestern. You can't stop bad football teams defensively. This team could be a disaster. I mean, these first 4 games have had to feel like 4 years for Nebraska fans, and I've talked about it. I feel like these fans deserve so much better. I saw it on the broadcast yesterday. I mean, the stands were full in the 3rd quarter when the game was well out of reach. I mean, this is a loyal fan base, but they are going to have a long season ahead of them. I just kind of wanted to start out with that. I mean, if you're Oklahoma, you can only play who's in front of you, and I get that, but I don't necessarily think that what we saw yesterday is going to lead me to believe that Oklahoma is just going to be some dominant force. I think the bigger takeaway is, this Nebraska team is just lifeless. All right, moving on from one rival to another for me. Texas A&M with an impressive win last night at home against Miami. I laid the 6 with the Aggies. It was a little too close for comfort at the end. Felt like they should have won that game by double digits, but it was a win and a cover nonetheless. A good bounce back game after what was a pretty rough week in College Station. A&M did end up making that switch from Haynes King to Max Johnson. I'd kind of been, preseason, I talked about it on the channel, how I thought that Max Johnson gave them a higher floor at quarterback. And A&M's a team with how good they are on their defensive front, how good they are in their secondary. They don't need great quarterback play to win, but what they can afford is what they were getting from Haynes King, and that's turnovers, and that's just total ineptitude. So I do think that move was the right move. He didn't play particularly well, 10 of 20 for 140 yards. The problem at A&M offensively, I believe it's just the system is outdated. I know that's been talked about a lot by other national media guys. Josh Pate talked about that on his show this past weekend. But the way all these other offensive minds are able to get their athletes in space, I mean, Jimbo Fisher is got to hand over the play calling duties to somebody else. I mean, they still only put up 17 points, and a big part of that was Devin Achane in the passing game. Johnson hit him on a swing route in the backfield, but I did have this game right in the sense that I felt like Miami, offensively at least, was grossly overrated. Give Miami credit; they exceeded my expectations defensively. Did hold Achane to just to less than 5 yards per carry. So I thought that was impressive. But listen, I just didn't think Miami was going to be able to move the ball that well against Texas A&M. They moved the ball okay, but they just couldn't finish drives. And, the reality of it is going up against that defensive front, that secondary, it's going to be hard to finish drives. I was wrong in the sense that I didn't particularly think Miami was going to be able to run the ball as well as they did. I mean, both Henry Parrish and Jalen Knighton were over 5 yards a carry. And I think that is A&M's weakness defensively is they can allow some chunk runs. And give Miami's offensive line credit. 0 sacks on Tyler Van Dyke. This Miami wide receiving core, though, is terrible. It was a problem in spring ball. It was a problem throughout the summer and fall camp. And it was a problem last night. I mean, drops, bad routes, just low football IQ at that receiver position. Passing game is about a lot more than quarterback play. I thought Tyler Van Dyke played better than his final stats would indicate. I mean, 21 of 41 for 217. That's just 5.3 yards per attempt. He didn't turn the ball over, but like I said, if you watch that game, Miami's receivers really let him down on multiple occasions, including on the last play of the game when it was a 4th and 4. Should have been a chain mover, and Miami was going to have a chance to possibly get in the red zone and try to tie that game up and send it to overtime. Wide receiving position there is a problem. I was right in the sense that didn't think Tyler Van Dyke was going to be able to create a ton of explosive plays against this A&M defense, and give A&M credit. This is how they're going to have to win games this year. Until they get any sort of creativity offensively, they're going to have to win games 17-9. They're going to have to ride the coattails of their defense. My macro level for Texas A&M, good win. Silence a lot of the noise around that program. Tough thing though is it's not going to get any easier just because you beat Miami at home. I mean, You go play Arkansas this week at Cowboy Stadium. That's going to be a heavyweight battle. You go on the road to Mississippi State, and then you get to go on the road to Alabama. Last night silenced some of the noise, but I wouldn't say Jimbo Fisher and kind of the Aggies' issues are necessarily solved because they got 3 really tough games coming up. Nevertheless, a win and a cover. Have to feel good about that. And as far as Miami, like I said, they stopped the run better than I thought. They protected Van Dyke better than I thought they would, but that receiver position is going to continue to hold them back. We saw Van Dyke really have to rely on Will Mowery, his tight end, because that's, other than that, who else is he going to trust? Good game in Aggieland late at night. I like those 8 p.m. Central Time kickoffs. I was at the UTSA Texas game, so got home and got to watch the end of that A&M game. Good win, good cover, and like I said, don't ever call me biased again because I'm not afraid to bet on my rival when I see the opportunity. All right, takeaway number 3 here from the Saturday slate. The CBS game of the week, Auburn, Alabama. Penn State with a great 41-12 win on the road. A lot of people made, this is the first time a Big Ten team has gone into SEC country, gone into Jordan-Hare Stadium. Didn't seem to matter. It turns out that the actual matchups on the football field is what matters most. With that being said, I did have this game somewhat wrong. I had a best bet on the under 47.5. I still feel like the majority of the time these two teams play that will come through, but Penn State had total control of this game in the second half, and there was just no punchback from Auburn to be able to keep that Penn State offense off the field. The one question I had for Penn State coming into this game is, would they be able to run the football in this matchup? Because they struggled to run the ball all of 2021. They didn't particularly run the ball great against Purdue in their season opener. But Nick Singleton is a true freshman, by far the best back on their team. He is starting to get an increased role in this offense, and he's a good enough talent to where he might be able to overcome some of their issues on the offensive line but this is the thing. Their offensive line played great yesterday. No sacks on Sean Clifford, and obviously Singleton went for 10 carries, 124 yards, 2 touchdowns, but Keytron Lee, 9 for 52. Evan Ford, 7 for 37. All 3 backs were able to really get some steady yards against this Auburn defense. This Auburn team is going to have real issues throughout SEC play because it goes beyond quarterback. We just kind of talked about it with Miami, but this Auburn wide receiving core is just not good enough. It's really as simple as that. They're not playing in the Sun Belt. You're playing in an SEC where there's a lot of teams with a lot of playmakers on the outside, and you aren't one of them. I know Tank Bigsby is a guy that can certainly carry a big load, but when there's not that threat of a real vertical passing game, teams are able to load the box and sell out to stop the run. TJ Finley was 11-19 for 152. He didn't play poor. I actually felt like he played pretty well early on. He played good enough. But he got sacked 4 times. They used Robbie Ashford in kind of a 2 quarterback system. He got basically equal playing time, 10 of 19 for 144, but both those guys threw picks. And even Robbie Ashford, who's more the mobile guy, he got sacked twice as well. And, Tank Bigsby didn't have a big impact on this game because Penn State was able to kind of pull away and take Auburn out of their game plan, which was to run the football and rely on their defense. So my biggest takeaway from this game is probably on the Penn State side because they seem to be playing much better up front than they did last year. Really all offseason, all I heard from that was hope. We hope our offensive line has improved. We're hopeful. Well, for me, I just got to see it. We saw it yesterday against a pretty stout defense in Auburn. I'm sure that Auburn's defense has regressed from where they were last year, but it's still a tough test on the road nonetheless. And very impressed with the way Penn State was able to run the ball. Sean Clifford didn't really have to be some superhero. He threw 19 passes, but they scored 41 points. That's all you can really ask for. As far as Auburn, thankfully they got 2 more home. Whoever made this Auburn schedule is a real one. They play Missouri next week at home, and then play LSU at home the week. 5 straight home games to start the season. That's about as favorable of a schedule to start the year as you can ask for. I'm sure I'll get into that game later in the week. The reality of it is, though, it's going to be really hard to be productive offensively when you're not posing a huge threat in the vertical passing game. And yes, a lot of it's on the quarterbacks. I think TJ Finley is just too inconsistent. I think Robbie Ashford, is probably the better option because he's a little bit more mobile, and it seems like they do have some issues along their offensive line as well. 6 sacks yesterday is a pretty big deal. We'll see if they can get those issues solved next week. I'm going to make a hot seat episode tomorrow, and that's going to be a weekly thing here on the channel going forward. I wouldn't say Brian Harson's on the hot seat. although his job was up for question after just 1 year last year. But this is certainly not going to earn him any friends with those Auburn boosters. And, the reality of it is these type of big games can't be 29-point blowouts at home. So it'll be interesting to see the fallout from this game. I'm not going to, drag Auburn anymore. Good win for Penn State. I had questions about Penn State coming into the year, like I said. It'll be interesting to see. I mean, playing teams like Ohio State and Michigan, I think a lot of people have just kind of written Penn State off as far as the Big Ten East race and just kind of the overall macro level of college football, and including myself. But if they can establish some sort of run game and they don't have to put everything on Sean Clifford, I think they proved yesterday that this can be a pretty efficient offense. And I don't think anybody's doubting what they have defensively. I mean, they got great corners, and they were able to get after the quarterback yesterday. So good win for Penn State and an equally tough home loss for Auburn. All right, Georgia, kind of just Georgia yesterday. I mean, listen, they were 17.5-point favorites against Oregon, won that game by 46. They were 24.5-point favorites yesterday on the road in an SEC game, and they won by 41. This team, I put a poll out yesterday on Twitter. Is 2022 Georgia better than 2021 Georgia? Time will tell. It's still early in the season, but we can't continue to overlook how good this team is playing right now. I mean, they made Oregon a few weeks ago look like an FC. I mean, they made that game look like they were playing Wofford. Look like they were playing, South Carolina State. I'm kind of have some FOMO right now. If you watch the Georgia South Carolina preview that I made on the channel earlier this week, I kind of envisioned this game playing out the way it did. I didn't end up adding Georgia to my card, which was obviously a mistake. But this Georgia team, it's really simple. With them offensively, you have to have an elite front four defensively, because if you allow Stetson Bennett time to pick you apart, he will. I mean, Stetson Bennett yesterday, 16-23, 284, 2 touchdowns, didn't get sacked once again, and didn't really get pressured all that much either. I mean, Brock Bowers is the best tight end in college football, 121 yards, 2 touchdowns yesterday. Ladd McConkey is having a great year for Georgia. This team, the reason I think that this team could be better is they obviously rode the coattails of that defense last year. JT Daniels started the year at quarterback. Stetson Bennett was integrated in, and it took a little bit of time for him to play well, but he did play really well last year. I've talked about it. I mentioned this last week. There's this narrative around Stetson Bennett, like, if he's at Missouri, he's an average player. That's not true. Stetson Bennett is playing at a Heisman Trophy level this year, and he played really stinking good last year too. Georgia is so much more explosive in the pass. I mean, I feel like they were pretty explosive in the passing game last year, way more so than people would give them credit for, but they're putting up big numbers this year in a way that they might not have been in 2021. And while still retaining a, borderline best defense in the country, this team has the potential to be great. Just like they were last year, this team is by far right now the best team in college football right now. We saw how many holes Alabama had a week ago when they played in Austin. Where's the hole on this Georgia team? I mean, maybe a little bit with the running game. I mean, Kendall Milton, just 10 carries for 32 yards. But like I said, they're so good along their offensive line that unless you can just get after the quarterback on them, which it's going to be hard for anybody to do that with that offensive line, they're going to pick you apart through the air. As far as South Carolina, really tough starts to the season, going to Fayetteville and then, coming back and playing Georgia. I feel like a lot of people will just write South Carolina off at this point because there was some sort of hype around them coming into the year. Shane Beamer did a fantastic job last year with not much at his disposal. Was able to win 7 games, took advantage of a Florida team that by that point in the season had quit. Really good bowl win against North Carolina. I think that overall record, though, kind of hid some of the issues around that team. That really wasn't a 7-win caliber team a year ago. Shane Beamer squeezed every ounce of potential he had out of last year's roster. So there was some sort of hype coming into this year, bringing in Spencer Rattler, another year of development for lots of guys on that team. But obviously back-to-back pretty decisive losses in SEC play. Things are going to get easier for this team. I mean, they got Charlotte next week at home, South Carolina State at home. So presumably they'll be 3-2 going into the bulk of their schedule. From there, it's not necessarily like they have any surefire wins. I mean, should beat Missouri at home, should beat Vanderbilt. I think they could be competitive against teams like A&M and Kentucky and probably Florida as well. This is a team, though, don't write them off. Spencer Rattler is still early in his career at South Carolina. Spencer Rattler doesn't have a lot around him because South Carolina can't run the football. They're not great along their offensive line, specifically in establishing the run, and they're not very talented at wide receiver. the goal for Shane Beamer these next 2 weeks has got to be, we've got to have some guys step up at the receiver position, and we've got to put a large emphasis on establishing the run. Because if you thought Spencer Rattler was just going to come in there and just take over the team by himself, that's just not how football gets played. I'm not writing this team off. I think their best football is definitely ahead. The main takeaway from that game early yesterday was this Georgia team is a juggernaut. Usually when you see a team favored by 24.5, 25 points on the road in conference play, you think, that's just too heavy for me. This Georgia team is an anomaly. They might blow out everybody they play. And now we obviously know that's not how college football works. I think a team like Tennessee could play them close. At Mississippi State later in the year could be an interesting trap game. But listen, this team is a juggernaut, and they've improved offensively in their passing game so much so to where I think they could right now be in a much better place than they were this time last year. And that's scary. This team is putting up scary numbers right now on both sides of the ball. By far right now, in my opinion, the best team in college football. All right, I want to take a quick break here. I know you see this shirt. We got the spaceship theme today. I know you've been staring at it the whole time. You might be asking, how do I look as cool and sexy as that guy with the voluptuous hair on my screen? Well, I'll tell you. Go to proud90.com and browse their selection. They got unique but very comfortable polos as well. They got t-shirts, hoodies, quarter zips. Fall is coming. Winter is coming. It's not going to be this hot forever. Proud90.com has got all your golf apparel needs. If you go to Proud90 and browse their selection, and if you see anything you like, at checkout, use code Fordham. It's going to get you 15% off your order. Code Fordham at Proud90.com. It's going to get you 15% off your order. Support me. Support Proud90. The rest of the information will be in the description. Let's get right back into the video. All right, last night in Death Valley, that 5 p.m. Central Time kickoff. I said I was going to get to this. I had a play on Mississippi State money line minus the 130. Got good value on that because that line crept up all the way to Mississippi State -3 by the time that game kicked off. I really felt good about where Mississippi State was going into that game because I love their front seven defensively, and I just thought that they were a point with Will Rogers in year 3. They got a lot of continuity on offense. Thought that was a game that they'd be able to win on the road. And listen, I know Death Valley is a tough place to play. I get that. But there's no excuse to play as bad as Mississippi State played in the second half. Really for them, I mean, their offensive line played terrible. I mean, Rogers got sacked 4 times, and that's kind of an indictment because in that air raid scheme where the ball is going to come out quick, I knew their offensive line wasn't great coming into last night, but like I said, that scheme is built to get the ball out of Rogers' hands quick. And so you wouldn't think that LSU would be able to take advantage of that weakness in this system. They did. And listen, Will Rogers is to blame too. I mean, 57% completion in an air raid system is not going to get it done. 5.1 yards per attempt is not going to get it done. I give credit to LSU's defense because throughout the course of that game, they were consistently winning up front, and they really just had Mississippi State in a chokehold. I mean, that Mississippi State offense looked inept in the second half. So give LSU credit. How important is Jaden Daniels to this team? I mean, LSU's offensive line is bad. It's bad. I mean, Jaden Daniels got sacked 3 more times last night. Probably could have been sacked a lot more. I mean, let's just think about this. This quarterback decision had to have been just so easy for Brian Kelly because Garrett Nussmeier doesn't have the mobility to be able to escape. It's going to be a pretty consistent pass rush against this offensive line. I mean, could you imagine Max Johnson playing behind this offensive line or Miles Brennan? I mean, this offensive line is not good, but I mean, Jaden Daniels in that quarterback run, I mean, 93 yards on the ground last night, a touchdown. He didn't throw the ball all that well, but like I said, one thing that's kind of hard to account for any defense because Mississippi State, I felt great about their front seven. They were winning up front, but I mean that quarterback run can kind of negate a lot of those issues. So Jaden Daniels is extremely valuable to this LSU team. Hopefully they can keep him healthy. He's not a very thick guy. 16 carries last night, got sacked 3 times. It'll be interesting to see if they can sustain that style throughout the season. Don't think LSU is out of the weeds yet. I still think they got issues, but listen, Death Valley was rocking last night. It's a tough place to play, and perhaps I should have just isolated Mississippi State in the first half because they played like you know what in the second half. And listen, I'll wear it. The reality of it is Will Rogers can't play as bad as he played. With how bad they played on both sides of the ball at times in the second half, felt strong in that play on Mississippi State, and I was wrong. LSU deserved to win that game. Had a great fourth quarter. Broke off some chunk runs late to kind of pull that game away. That won't be the last time I'm on Mississippi State this year. I still like the makeup of that team. Just got to play better down the stretch. All right, takeaway number 6. Marcus Freeman, first win as Notre Dame head coach. Only took him 4 games. Notre Dame more so kind of survives an ugly affair between Cal. I mean, listen, I expected Notre Dame to win that game. I wasn't going to lay double digits with them. I said that, if you're into money line parlays, which in most of the time I'm not, I felt like they were a good money line parlay piece because, listen, Cal is just a very mediocre football team. We saw it in the first 2 weeks of the season with close wins against UC Davis and UNLV. I mean, I had a hard time seeing them go in there and win that game. They just don't have any explosiveness offensively. Give Marcus Freeman credit because, dealing with a backup quarterback situation, Drew Pine played fine, I guess, 17 to 23, but only 150 yards. It was clear that Tommy Rees was going to go very conservative, try to run the football. And they did to a pretty mediocre level. Audric Estime was, 18 for 76, and Chris Tyree, who was just not a very good in between the tackles running back, was under 4 yards a carry. But that's one of those games at this point for Notre Dame. It's not about winning by margin. You just got to get on the board with a win, especially after last week's debacle. By the way, Marshall lost yesterday right on the heels of that Notre Dame win. So that's not great if you're an Irish fan, but things are about to get really interesting for Notre Dame. Once again, you're not out of the weeds yet because now you got to go to Chapel Hill and play North Carolina. North Carolina's offense has looked fantastic here in their first 3 games. I mean, Drake May has looked like the real deal at quarterback. I do think North Carolina is pretty vulnerable defensively, but it's going to be interesting to see, can Notre Dame take advantage of that? Because, I mean, just on the surface of things, it would appear that as if North Carolina can just simply win that game by outscoring Notre Dame. And I know that's a very simplified square version to look at it, but sometimes it is that simple. I think Notre Dame still got a long way to go offensively because they just don't have a lot of elite talent at the wide receiver position. Thankfully, they have Michael Mayer, but just struggling to run the ball and create chunk plays in the run game. Now you got a backup quarterback. Listen, it was a good win. It was a win, which is all you really needed yesterday. But it'll be interesting to see, how Notre Dame progresses throughout this season. Still think that they are in some sort of trouble because it's not only North Carolina. You have that bye week, and then you go to Vegas and play BYU, who at this point I think is a pretty well-oiled machine, despite yesterday's result in Eugene. I mean, think BYU at this point. Don't see why I wouldn't bet them to win that game. As far as Cal, I mean, I mentioned this. I'm going to make a hot seat episode tomorrow, but Justin Wilcox doesn't deserve to keep that job. I mean, he shows no willingness offensively to just kind of break out of his conservative comfort zone. At some point, you've got to start taking some shots. You've got to start showing some sense of urgency offensively. I mean, Cal has lost so many games like this since Justin Wilcox has been there. These one possession losses. They played fine defensively yesterday. I mean, they held Notre Dame to under 300 total yards. I mean, I don't know. I'll talk about it a little bit more tomorrow. Nevertheless, Notre Dame needed to get on board with a win, and they did. Don't necessarily think that changes my opinion of them much, but a good win for Marcus Freeman nonetheless. All right, moving on to the Pac-12 here. How about Oregon and Washington? I know they don't really do divisions in the Pac-12 anymore, but 2 of those teams that used to be in the Pac-12 North, I mean, Oregon played BYU yesterday. Y'all know how I feel about BYU. Played them over the 8 wins. I've talked about them a lot here early in the season. I mean, Oregon totally controlled that game from start to finish. 41-20 win. Give credit to Bo Nix. I mean, I'm not a huge Bo Nix guy. Feel like in his tougher matchups, he's pretty limited as a downfield thrower. But, I mean, 13 of 18 for 222, no picks, no sacks. I mean, really good showing for Bo Nix. And they were able to kind of really lean in the run game on that BYU front 7. Irving had 97 yards. Whittington had 66 yards. Bo Nix is obviously a threat as a runner as well. Didn't know if BYU is going to get their top 2 receivers back. Puka Nakua and Gunnar Romney were both hurt here early in the season. Neither of those guys played yesterday. Saw that kind of have an impact on that BYU team. I mean, listen, Jaron Hall still played well. 305 yards through the air, 71% completion. But the issue with BYU, and the one thing I was willing to acknowledge, even though I am high on them, they had a big loss last year when they lost Ty Algier, their running back. I mean, I know they brought in Chris Brooks from Cal, but I mean, just 10 for 28 yesterday. This Oregon front 7 on their defense is stout. Obviously losing Kayvon Thibodeau hurts their pass rush considerably, but they can win up front in their interior. They got great linebacker play with Noah Sewell, Justin Flo. I think that Georgia game, just shows how good Georgia is, because that is a physical Oregon front seven. Do you think they're somewhat vulnerable in their secondary? But Mario Cristobal, during his time at Oregon, recruited at an elite level. I said this last year that, I think Oregon, from a talent roster standpoint, can match up with the top dogs in college football. BYU kind of obviously takes a different approach, obviously got a much more older, experienced roster. Just from an efficiency standpoint, that Oregon offense looked good. As far as Washington, hand up, I bet Michigan State plus the 3.5. That was the best bet. That was a game I circled preseason as one that I felt Michigan State would win outright on the road. And I was not high on Washington coming into the year. Played them under the 7.5 wins. Now, obviously, that's still in play. I'm not willing to just concede that out of the gates. But my read coming into that game yesterday, playing Michigan State, was I felt like people were grossly overestimating what Michael Penix's abilities were as a quarterback, and maybe to a lesser extent, kind of Kalen DeBoer's offensive ability as a coach. I just felt like for a first-year head coach for most of his career, Michael Penix has been an incredibly mediocre quarterback. I know Michigan State's pass defense was terrible a year ago, but I just felt like people were kind of grossly overestimating what Washington was going to be able to do through the air. I was wrong. I mean, Michael Penix didn't turn the ball over, almost at 10 yards per attempt. Didn't really get much of a run game going, but they didn't need to. I mean, Penix threw for 397, 4 touchdowns. I mean, they totally dominated Michigan State through the air. It's always tough to come on here when you knew that Michigan State was one of the worst pass defense teams in the country last year. You're expecting that to improve this year, but sometimes, and this is just a reminder, I think, that let teams show you improvement before you just expect it, because it's pretty tough to defend that Michigan State pick when you knew how bad they were in that role. And listen, I still am not going to crown Michael Penix some king, but I mean, they were able to take advantage of what is proven to be a bad pass defense. I thought Michigan State battled back in that game pretty well. I mean, Peyton Thorne was without his top target, and Jaden Reed. That hurt as well, because from what I had read throughout the week, it sounded like that was much more of a precautionary deal. He was more so just sore and didn't think there'd be any question that he was going to play, but he didn't play. They got off to a tough start. They couldn't run the football, which, I mean, that was a big part of my handicap. I was expecting them to be able to have a pretty balanced attack offensively. Peyton Thorne eventually kind of took over, and Michigan State battled their way back in the game, but I mean, that was the total wrong side. Give credit to Washington, perhaps. My read on them was wrong coming into the year. I'm still not willing to admit that they're going to win 8 games. I still think that there's tough games on their schedule that they can absolutely drop. It's still a first-year coaching staff, and I still don't think Michael Penix is as good as many other people believe, but you wouldn't have known that watching yesterday's game. They took advantage of what's proven to be a bad Michigan State pass defense. Give them credit. Hand up, I was wrong. Kansas State was a team that was probably one of the more popular, preseason win total over bets that I saw throughout the summer. They lost outright yesterday at home to Tulane. Now, Tulane had a horrible 2021 season, but they had a lot coming back. I was expecting improvement for them this year, but I mean, and you got to remember, they almost beat Oklahoma back in the season opener last year in Norman. So this is a team that has proven that they can step up in some of these tougher road matchups. But I mean, Kansas State, their offense with Adrian Martinez, I mean, Skylar Thompson perhaps hid some of their issues last year, because I felt like Skylar Thompson was the perfect quarterback for that system. I mean, the way he and Deuce Vaughn were able to kind of feed off each other in the pass and the run game. I mean, it just doesn't seem like they have that same level of comfort with Adrian Martinez. I mean, this is why completion percentage is extremely overrated, because he was 21 of 31 yesterday, but 150 yards. I mean, 4.8 yards per attempt. I believe yards per attempt is by far, from a counting stat standpoint, the number one stat you should look at, because I don't care if you're 67%. If you're less than 5 yards per attempt, you are no threat down the field as a thrower. And that's how you put up 10 points against a, clearly inferior opponent. Give Tulane credit as well, because they were able to bottle up Deuce Vaughn, just 81 yards on the ground on 20 carries. I did see that as somewhat of a strength for them coming in, like what Tulane has at that linebacker position. But I mean, Deuce Vaughn is an incredibly electric player. Don't face too many backs like that in the American Athletic Conference. So I wasn't exactly expecting them to hold them to 4 yards a carry, but they did. And to put up 10 points at home against Tulane is pretty embarrassing. So now they got to go on the road and play Oklahoma. I'm not saying they can't step up for that spot. They've I don't think anybody on Kansas State's going to be afraid to go into Norman next week. I wouldn't be surprised that game is close, but Kansas State's offense, especially their passing game, has been extremely underwhelming here to start the season. But listen, give Tulane credit. I think too many eyes were on that game, but a pretty big upset nonetheless. All right, I'm assuming everybody saw this yesterday, but how about Kansas? 3-0 start to the season, back-to-back road wins as pretty sizable underdogs. They went on the road and beat West Virginia in overtime last week, and now they go to Houston, who a lot of people pegged as a true New Year's Six bowl contender. I mean, that game wasn't close, 48-30. This Kansas offense, man, this is another proof. Having a dual threat quarterback, it can really hide some of your other issues. I mean, Jalen Daniels, 123 yards on the ground. He also looked really good as a thrower. No sacks, no turnovers, 3 touchdowns, very efficient. Houston was able to stop the run, pretty well otherwise. But, man, that quarterback run is just a huge dynamic that can really hide those issues that, I believe Kansas still has on their offensive line. But, give Jalen Daniels credit. He's developed into a pretty good option for him. As far as Houston, I felt like they were overvalued a little bit. They just don't have any balance offensively. I mean, Clayton Tune was kind of running for his life yesterday, got sacked 4 times. I mean, he's not really a running quarterback, and he had to run the ball 16 times to kind of evade that rush. I mean, Tajon Henry is just not a good running back, 3.7 yards a carry. Brandon Campbell broke off 1 chunk run, but this is just an incredibly unbalanced offense. We saw it again with Purdue yesterday. It's really hard to just be so predictable. I mean, that's how you disappoint. That's how you lose by 18 at home. You've got to have some sort of balance offensively, and they just don't have that right now. But for them to go, I mean, I felt really good about Houston's front four defensively. They weren't able to get home on Daniels, and obviously Kansas puts up 48 points on the road. This is proof. I mean, Kansas is really back, and at the very least, they are not a bottom dweller in college football anymore. It'll be interesting to see because the last decade has been obviously as bad as it's been. It'll be interesting to see which kind of other. I mean, maybe it's Northwestern. Maybe it's, I don't know. I mean, if you have an idea of who kind of that next bottom dweller team is, let me know below. But it's not Kansas. That's back-to-back road wins. If you told Lance Leipold last year that you'd go on the road and beat West Virginia and then turn right around the next week and blow out Houston on the road, he'd have probably looked at you like you were crazy. Lance Leipold has done a really good job there. His name has been floated around for that Nebraska job. I don't know if he take that job because, seems like a guy that does want to really turn around Kansas and seems like he has a path to do that here. Really good win for the Jayhawks. The last main thing I want to get to here today, we saw 3 teams that are all kind of expected to win 8-9 games this year that all were really pushed to their limits at home yesterday. We'll start with Arkansas. I forgot that Bobby Petrino was coaching at Missouri State. I know Bobby Petrino has kind of had a troubled past, including his time at Arkansas, and obviously he ran Louisville into the ground. But at his best, Bobby Petrino is a good football coach, and he had Arkansas on skates at times in the second half. Thankfully, though, the Razorbacks pull away. That would have been a bad loss for. I mean, I have Arkansas over 7.5 wins. Obviously, they moved to 3-0 last night. Things like this happen. I do think Arkansas is somewhat vulnerable defensively. Jason Shelley from Missouri State threw for 357 yards. And, wow, you sacked 8 times. I didn't look at that before. The one thing Arkansas can do defensively, we saw it last week against Spencer Rattler, is they can get pressure on the quarterback, but their secondary is less than ideal. They lost Jalen Catalon for the year, who's maybe their most important guy in that secondary. And then do think their corners are vulnerable. But ultimately, Razorbacks were able to make some explosive plays, had a special teams return for a touchdown, and were able to pull away with a double-digit win, but very deceiving final score. If you watch that game in the fourth quarter, it did feel like a little bit like, wow, are they really going to lose at home to Missouri State after those 2 big wins? It all goes forgotten. Arkansas starts the year off 3-0. How about Florida? 24.5-point favorites against South Florida. They probably should have lost that game once again. I mean, they were lucky to beat Utah. South Florida had a botched snap when they were trying to set up a field goal and possibly win the game. I mean, South Florida outgained Florida by almost 100 yards. South Florida really just pinned their ears back and ran the football well. Bohannon had over 100 yards on the ground. Brian Battle, 17 carries, 150 yards. And once again, we saw Anthony Richardson struggle as a passer. They kind of took him out of the run game once again, just 24 yards on the ground. I mean, he was just 10 of 18, threw 2 picks. Billy Napier is going to just have to abandon this idea of making him of confining Richardson to the pocket. We saw against Utah, he can be an electric player when he's kind of allowed to, just be an athlete. And listen, I know defensively, teams can, spy the quarterback. Teams can, try to take away the quarterback run. But at some point, I think that you just kind of throw all that out the window and let Anthony Richardson be himself as a runner, because Florida's offense, just 329 total yards last night. Their running backs have somewhat surprised me. I know Trevor Etienne has kind of come onto the scene. Montrell Johnson Jr. had a big chunk run last night, but this team does still have some ways to go. I think what it really starts with, Billy Napier, his mindset when you have a guy as talented as Richardson should be, I don't care if they spy Richardson. I don't care if they sell out to stop the quarterback run. Your best chance of being a good offense is to let Richardson be himself in the run game. So it'll be interesting to see if they do that, because they're 10-point dogs this week in Knoxville against Tennessee. And if Florida's going to stay competitive in that game, it's going to have to come via the legs of Anthony Richardson. Last thing, UCLA kicked a game-winning field goal late against South Alabama. That was a little bit of a fishy line. I mean, UCLA was only, I think, 14 and a half point favorites at home in that game, which this is kind of a bigger point. Have y'all seen the Rose Bowl this year for UCLA home games? I mean, I know a lot of people kind of left the state of California over the last two and a half years for reasons that don't need to be stated here. But like, did every college football fan leave that state? I mean, what are we doing? I mean, I know UCLA is not a traditional blue blood anymore like they might have once been. If you're going to have like 10% capacity in one of the most historic venues in college football, you shouldn't get to play there. That's a write-in rule for me. It's embarrassing to see the Rose Bowl, of all places, be left empty like that for a home game. And UCLA is supposed to win 9 games this year. I mean, I played them over the 8.5 wins. Dorian Thompson-Robinson is a fun guy to watch. Why they can't get more people in the stands is beyond me. I know it's an off-site game, which I tend to not like that. I think college football is better when it's on campus. It's just part of what makes college football different. So I get that, but the Rose Bowl is a cool place to play, and why they can't get more people in the stadium is beyond me. I'm not going to really break down that game because I don't really think, apparently nobody cares about California football. So we'll move on. The only other thing I wanted to touch on, that App State Hail Mary was, I mean, game day was at App State yesterday, so somewhat of a noteworthy result. Can we just, I mean, has anybody had a more interesting and up and down first 3 weeks to the season than App State? I mean, they play that thrilling game in week 1 against North Carolina, 63-61. They probably should have won that game. They had a chance for 2 separate 2-point conversions, didn't convert either of them. They lose at home. Then they go on the road to Texas A&M as 18-point dogs and win outright. And then yesterday, it looked like they were, dead and out against Troy. Troy played them really tough. Give Troy a lot of credit, but there was a very interesting call there. Troy was up 4. They were backed up on a 4th down, and they decided to take a safety, which made it a 2-point game. Now, obviously, in retrospect, it wouldn't have mattered because if App State scored the touchdown, they still would have won the game. But in theory, taking a safety to, make it less than a field goal game. I mean, if App State was able to make one explosive play through the air when they got the ball back, they can kick a field goal and win the game. I would have just punted that ball away, but that's just me. Nevertheless, just a crazy start to the season for App State. To say they're battle tested would be an understatement, and think that's actually something that, for all they've gone through, to say you're 2-1 now, I think they'd take that in a heartbeat. So they're a battle-tested team. It'll be interesting to see how they fare the rest of the season. Y'all got to remember the Sun Belt added some teams like Marshall. They've obviously got Coastal Carolina, Louisiana. That's a really good conference, and they had a great week last week. I mean, I think Georgia State – well, no, never mind. Georgia State lost yesterday. I think they're 0-3 now, but that Sun Belt Conference is going to be a fun one to follow this year, and what an absolutely bonkers result in Boone last night. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today's episode. I appreciate y'all watching. I mentioned this throughout the episode, but I'm going to come back on and probably at some point on Monday, I'm going to have a hot seat video. I'm going to do that every week. I know it's early in the season, but we've got a lot of controversy flying around with some of these coaching vacancies. It's not just Nebraska. We got West Virginia, Louisville, Purdue. I mean, we do have some hot seat talk to discuss. So that's kind of a weekly episode I want to do moving forward. I also do weekly breakdowns from a betting perspective for all of the best games on any given week. So be sure you're subscribed to the channel. I really appreciate that. Like the video. That really helps out the growth of this channel, and I'd appreciate that. Once again, proud90.com. Code Fordham is going to get you 15% off your order. Go to proud90.com, browse their selection. Appreciate y'all watching once again. If I didn't hit anything that you felt was noteworthy from yesterday in week 3, leave a comment below. With that being said, guys, I will see y'all this coming week. I'll have the hot seat video out tomorrow with the game breakdowns for week 4 to follow. College football is back and better than ever.